Welcome. My name is Jane Salmonson and I'm the Chief Executive at Scotland's International Development Alliance. Great that you could join us for this webinar. The purposes of the webinar today are threefold. First of all, we hope that the webinar will give you an opportunity to develop a better understanding of the Scottish context for international development, particularly at board level, at trustee level, for organisations who are operating around the world. Second one, to help you become more aware of the tools which are available to you, which you can use to assess your governance. For example, the SCVO checkup and the Alliance's safeguarding checklist. Thirdly, to share examples with the network of good governance and strategies that you can use to do a bit better, as well as sharing practical solutions to challenges which we all encounter in our sector, those of us who are operating internationally. So that's better understanding, greater awareness of the tools available, and sharing of examples. So let's keep an eye on those three objectives, and please let us help us to make sure that we meet those objectives. Just very, very briefly, the Alliance itself is a network of about 155 organisations working around the world, mainly international NGOs, but also universities, companies, individuals, a growing network of organisations and people working in international relief and equitable international development. We're going to discuss today what good governance means for your organisation practically. And we have SCVO's new Good Governance Checkup, and at the Alliance, our own health check on safeguarding as two particularly helpful tools recently developed that we would like to introduce you to. There are complexities associated with governance for Scottish-based international charities. We have to deal with different legal contexts, different country requirements. Risk mapping will look different in different contexts, and risk and identification and management of risk is, of course, a governance level issue. There's still progress to be made, which we may not have time to touch on today, but let's just flag them up and keep a sight of them as regards governance. For example, diversity and inclusion, we could be doing a lot better. Pay across the sector, we could be doing a lot better. Gender and gender balance on boards, we could be doing a lot better. But we might leave them till the end and touch on them if we have time. What we're going to do is have some speakers which I'm going to introduce to you, who will be presenting their PowerPoint presentations. If you have a question relating to the presentation that you have just seen, please type it into the chat box. If you have questions which are more general, more in the round, we'll save them all till the end and scoop them up all together at the end. So our first presenter I would like to introduce you to is Tracy Bird, and Tracy is an Information Officer at SCVO. Tracy, over to you for an introduction on SCVO's new Good Governance Checkup. Thank you.
Thank you, Jane. Nice to be here with you. My name is Tracy Bird, as Jane said, and I've been with SCVO for over 20 years, and I run the information service there. And on a daily basis, I help people set up and run charities and voluntary organisations. I've worked with the Scottish Governance Forum to produce the Scottish Governance Code for the third sector, which was published late last year. And I've also produced SCVO's Good Governance Checkup, which I hope you've all managed to download for this session. Today we're going to concentrate on good governance and use the governance code and the checkup to explore how individual trustees and the board collectively can demonstrate good governance. Here is a formal definition of governance that I quite like. It's from the Cass Business School Centre for Charity Effectiveness. And basically it sums up that, in short, governance is about trustees leading their organisation, providing direction and supervising their organisation's activities so they match their aims and what they're set up to do. So here are some words that you'll find recurring in the Scottish Governance Code for the third sector, as you'll see: effectiveness, values, accountability, etc. But why does good governance matter? Well, it matters in all sectors, banking, the NHS, local government, but especially in our sector, where our purpose is to serve our beneficiaries as best we can. And good governance matters because it underpins successful organisations and is vital for effectiveness and sustainability. And it's also the best way to protect and enhance the reputation of our individual organisations and also the sector as a whole. Because a good reputation takes years to build and can take seconds to destroy. And this is what happens when you don't have good governance. When you lose sight of the people you serve and lose touch with the core values of your organisation, you get the kind of headlines that nobody wants to see. Scandals in fundraising, safeguarding, charity governance, and a decline in public trust, which affects all of us in the sector. And I'm sure we'll all agree nobody wants to be a headline in the Daily Mail. So that's where the Scottish Governance Code for the Third Sector comes in. It was launched late last year by Scotland's Third Sector Governance Forum, following consultation with over 250 individuals and organisations. The Governance Forum brings together individuals and organisations with knowledge and expertise in governance issues, and it includes representatives from SCVO, my own organisation, OSCA, the Office of the Scottish Charity Regulator, Scottish Government, and also the Association of Chief Officers of Scottish Voluntary Organisations. And there's also quite a few consultants that work in the sector that are really interested in governance as well. So the code, we hope, is accessible and applicable to all third sector organisations in Scotland, whatever their size or shape or activities, and also whether they're charities, voluntary organisations or social enterprises. It sets out 5 core principles, encouraging organisations to look at and improve their governance. And all 5 principles are of equal importance. I would say the code's not a legal or regulatory requirement, but instead it's a tool to support continuous improvement and strengthen the effectiveness of governance across the sector. So these are the 5 core principles: organisational purpose, leadership, board behaviour, control and effectiveness. And within the code, each principle has a summary statement followed by an explanation of how you can demonstrate and implement the principle. As I've said, the principles are universal, but how each organisation implements each principle will depend on its size, income, activities and complexity. The code is also supported by practical resources, which can be found on the website. The address is on the slide, and you can download a copy of the code there. So let's take a look at each one of the 5 principles in more detail. And we'll start with organisational purpose. And that's because the whole board needs to be clear about who and what they exist for and the difference they want to make. A board collectively needs to be clear about their organisational purpose. They need to know their vision and their priorities and share a set of values that guide their work together and frame their decision making. Because good governance is about more than a tick box exercise. It's about acting consistently and instinctively in line with your organisational values. And everything the board, the trustees do need to be in line with your organisational purpose. So as the board, you have ultimate responsibility for directing the activity of your organisation and delivering its stated purpose. But how can you evidence good governance and demonstrate as trustees that you're clear about your purpose, your vision and your values and how you're going to achieve your aims? Well, if we take a look at the SCVO Good Governance Checkup, we can see a number of suggestions, and many of these centre around the importance of your governing document. And that can be called your constitution, your memo in arts, your trust deed, but it's basically the rules and regulations of how you're going to run your organisation. So a vital first step is to ensure all of your trustees have read and understood your governing document. And working on the SCVO Information Service, I see so many organisations where this doesn't happen. It's also important to regularly review your governing document to ensure it's fit for purpose as your organisation develops and grows. And it's a good idea maybe to have a copy at board meetings in case you need to check anything, such as the number you might need for a quorum, etc. So as you can see in the checkup, if you've got a copy there, there's other ways to show that you're clear about your organisational purpose. And one really good way is to develop and agree a written statement outlining your mission, values and objectives. And if you can do this, this will give your organisation a long-term view and unite everyone around a common sense of purpose and identity from which you can develop strategy. It also communicates clearly to any stakeholders, both internal and external, what your organisation is about. And most importantly, it means that you'll ensure your mission, values and objectives underpin all of your board decisions. The next core principle of good governance is all about leadership and providing strategic direction. And here it's vital that as a trustee, you understand your role and your responsibilities. So the Scottish Governance Code says that as the board, you're there to lead your organisation. You're individually and collectively responsible for your decisions. So you need to make sure your organisation has a clear strategy to achieve your organisational purpose. So in order to set that strategy, you need to be careful that you don't get bogged down in the day-to-day organisational detail of your organisation. And a good place to start with this is to know and respect the difference between governance and management. So this slide sums up the difference between the two. And as you can see, it's on scales. I think it's recognised that it can be quite a delicate balancing act. Governance is about oversight and planning, and management is about taking care of daily operations. And sometimes the lines between the roles can get blurred, particularly if you're a smaller organisation and maybe you don't have staff, so some trustees are doing more operational roles. So what can help in separating out the roles and responsibilities? Well, to get the balance right, so the board focuses on strategy, performance and assurance rather than operational matters, it's vital that as a trustee, you know your role well and understand the importance of boundaries. So you should have clear role descriptions for trustees, terms of reference for any subcommittees, and job descriptions for staff, if you do have staff, and also a scheme of delegation. And that should help provide clarity around who has authority to make different decisions. And that should be regularly reviewed and available to all trustees, staff and volunteers. So everyone is clear about their role and responsibilities and, importantly, their legal liabilities. But remember, even if you delegate as a trustee, you're still ultimately responsible and accountable for the work of your organisation. The third principle of the Scottish Governance Code is all about board behaviour. And board behaviour, both collectively and individually, can have a far-reaching impact on an organisation's reputation and success. While working on SCVO's information service, I've seen some horror stories where organisations are seriously damaged by dysfunctional boards where there's no mutual respect, integrity, openness and accountability. And that's why behaviour is a core principle of the code. So a well-run board, both collectively and individually, embraces and demonstrates mutual respect, integrity, openness and accountability. But before we explore this in more depth, what do we mean by accountability? Again, I'm just going to give you a minute to have a think about who the trustees are accountable to and for what in an organisation. So, as I say, just type into the chat box, who do you think has a stake in your organisation? And basically a stakeholder is anyone with a legitimate interest, direct or indirect, in what you do. Well, here's some of my ideas. As I say, you've got regulators such as Oscar if you're a charity. You've got donors, service users, as I've said, beneficiaries. I wonder if anybody had anything different that's not on this slide. Funders, donors. I did this workshop a few weeks ago with the Church of Scotland group, and they added God to their list of stakeholders who they're accountable to. So that was interesting. So basically, this is a good exercise that you could do with the whole board to get all your trustees thinking about accountability. And what might your stakeholder expectations be? Well, here's some of my ideas again. And this is just to get you thinking that you may owe a different level of obligation to each of your stakeholders. And that's why it's important to know who they are and understand their needs and expectations and be clear how you're going to respond to them. And often stakeholder expectations might overlap. For example, if you've got staff and funders, they'll want good employment practice. But sometimes in a voluntary organisation or charity, stakeholder expectations might compete. So for example, a funder might want you to carry out certain activities that may move you away from what your members and beneficiaries see as your core purpose. So that's when it's up to you, the trustees, to strike the right balance and ensure your organisation stays true to its purpose. And you, the trustees, are the key link between your organisation and its stakeholders. So as we've said, trustees need to understand their behaviour is fundamental to their organisation's reputation and success. And that's both collectively and individually. And it should be consistent with your organisation's vision and values. So how can you evidence good behaviour? Well, again, if you look at the checkup, there are a number of suggestions, such as being transparent, promoting equality, listening, and handling concerns and complaints. And here's a few other things. Conflicts of interest. It's important to recognise and acknowledge where conflicts of interest may arise. And sometimes you just can't avoid that, having conflicts of interest, because a lot of trustees tend to be committed, energetic, and socially aware individuals, and they might sit on other boards or be loyal to particular community interests. So it's important not to panic if your board is faced with a conflict of interest. It's not about trying to prevent it, it's about how you manage it that matters. There's 3 main steps involved in dealing with a conflict of interest: identify, disclose, then manage. And sometimes it might also be necessary to take some legal advice. But a good starting point here for any board is for every trustee to always keep in mind while they're on the board, they're there to serve the best interests of the organisation, not to follow their own agenda, and they've got to be able to put aside any differences to protect the future of the organisation. So there are some ways to evidence that you're dealing with conflicts of interest, such as making time and space for trustees to discuss issues, and not just conflicts of interest, but also conflicts of loyalty, so that you can develop a policy that everyone can understand and adhere to. And you should ensure all your trustees declare all interests in other organisations and businesses that could conflict with their role, and aware of conflicts of interest that might be caused by personal relationships. You should have conflicts of interest as a standing item on your agenda, and any declared conflicts of interest should be included in the minutes. And of course, trustees shouldn't take part in discussions or decisions where there is any conflict of interest. And what about dealing with conflicts between trustees? Differences of opinion are common on a board, and trustees are there to challenge. And it's good to have different points of view. That's how you get good decision making. But obviously that can lead to potential disharmony. So it's important to manage healthy debate in a positive way and create a constructive board environment where diverse and sometimes conflicting views are respected and welcomed, and decisions are reached collectively. If you've got a good chair, that can help to ensure all trustee voices are heard equally in meetings, and also to try and create an open culture of trust and support and a safe space to challenge. And this should all be evidenced in your minutes, and maybe get your trustees to sign up to a code of conduct. And that should outline expected standards of behaviour, for example, attendance at meetings and the importance of maintaining confidentiality. Okay. So what do we mean by collective decision making and collective responsibility? Well, it means that every member of the governing team is equally responsible. You might have trustees that have particular legal or financial skills, but everybody on the board is responsible in an equal way. There shouldn't be any factions or cliques on your board, and you've got to reach collective majority decisions. And if you as a trustee don't agree with a decision, then you should register your dissent and get it minuted. But you've got to present a united front as soon as you leave that meeting. If you're not at a meeting, read the minutes and make sure you have your say, because that's your duty and responsibility. And also be sure you can commit the time to being a trustee, to do the preparation and reading for the meetings, to attend regularly and contribute to debate and decision making. The 4th principle in the code is control, and that's essential to good governance, and it's of particular importance to international development organisations, where your work and financial commitments might be far away from where your trustees are, and carried out where legal systems and cultural norms may be very different. Trustees are there to safeguard the assets and reputation of their organisation and its beneficiaries, and they need strong controls in place to do this. So as the board, you've got to put in place appropriate structures, controls and processes to make sure your organisations run in line with your purposes, your values, your governing document and any relevant legal and regulatory requirements. And as I said previously, as with all of the code principles, how you might demonstrate and implement the principle of control will differ across the third sector. So the controls needed for a large national organisation with an income of several £1 million are not going to be the same as a small after-schools club. Risk management. Trustees also have to identify and assess both risks and opportunities for their organisation and decide how best to deal with them. Managing risks is one of the key duties of a trustee and is essential to good governance. But this is about more than having a checklist of worst-case scenarios you might face. It's about clearly understanding the level of potential risk that's acceptable to enable your organisation to achieve what it's set up to do. Potential risks aren't just financial, regulatory and operational. You should also consider external risks that could impact your organisation's future, such as political, environmental, economic, social and technological change. I'm not going to go into detail on safeguarding because Philippa's covering this later. And I'm sure you're aware that there's loads of support you can get from the Alliance. Good reporting is vital for effective controls. So as trustees, you've got to make sure you're getting the right information on finance, staffing, etc. Good reports are vital for good governance, and every paper and report provided to the board should have a clear purpose. Good governance means fundraising ethically and in line with your organisation's purpose and values. And finally, finance. Trustees should all understand their collective financial responsibilities. It's not just down to the treasurer and any financial experts on the board. Finally, effectiveness is the fifth principle. And again, it returns to the theme of trustees understanding their role, powers, and their duties. So as the board, you have to be self-aware and work together as a team with a diverse and appropriate balance of skills and the experience to continually improve the governance of your organisation. So what kind of required skills and experience do you need on a board to be effective and ensure good governance? I don't know whether you think you've all got those required skills on your board, or maybe if there's any particular sections of society or underrepresented, women, younger people. Diversity on a board is vital to good governance because an organisation that reflects the diversity of the community it serves is more likely to understand the range of its perspectives and needs and is more likely to retain the confidence of its supporters. And as I'm sure you're aware, diversity is not just about visible differences such as age, gender and race. It also encompasses other aspects like difference of education, marital status, and also diversity of thought and opinion. So it's good governance to identify and address any obstacles to diversity. I'm now going to leave you with 5 top drivers of good governance for you to think about. And I would just say people don't tend to join boards because they love governance. I think I'm one of the few in that. It's because they believe in a cause and they want to do some good. But when things go wrong, these aims can get forgotten. So good governance is vital for your organisation's long-term future. It's important to funders, the general public, your beneficiaries and to all of our sector. So use the Scottish Governance Code and SCVO's checkup to help you on your journey to good governance. And I wondered if anyone's got any immediate questions, or we can also have time at the end for questions. And thank you for listening.
Any questions from any of our participants just for Tracy on that presentation? But if not, we'll save them till the end and move on to Philippa, our Programme Manager, Safeguarding and Mentoring. Philippa's developed a lot of work recently on safeguarding over the last 18 months or so. She is particularly interested in the relationship with governance and has been rolling out a series of trainings for trustees. Safeguarding remains not only an operational but also a governance issue. That slide of Tracy's "the buck stops," I'm afraid, does entail safeguarding as much as the other issues. So, Philippa, thank you for joining this session, and please could you talk us through safeguarding and trusteeship?
Thank you for introducing this whole area of good governance, Tracy. And I think I would like to hone in a little bit on the safeguarding perspective. I'm going to scoot through a number of slides, and I'm not going to necessarily talk to all of them because I'd like to leave them with you as a resource for the end of the webinar and for future use. But I wanted to just let you know that what is available. I will quickly walk us through safeguarding, refresh our understanding of it, look at the roles and responsibilities around safeguarding, leadership and culture, which is a critical area and one which is under current priority, and then I'll look at the resources we have, including the safeguarding health check, which we've developed and which some of you are hopefully familiar with if you've used it before. The first thing, just to kind of get us thinking, in relation to governance particularly, could you just put a few words in the chat box about how you define, what do you think of when we say safeguarding, how do you define that? What do you think of? And just a few words, just a few thoughts to just kick us off and see if we're sharing the same understanding. Safeguarding is about health cultures and organisations. It's about protecting vulnerable groups and people. It's about having a healthy culture and organisations. Yes, good start. What I'd like to do is share with us the definition that we have used within the Alliance and across Scotland. It might not be entirely pertinent for every single organisation, but this is the general definition which we use, and I'll read through it because I think it's helpful just to keep us on the same page. Our definition is that safeguarding promotes the safety and welfare of people involved in the delivery or receipt of humanitarian aid and development assistance, protecting them from harm, including all forms of exploitation, abuse and harassment. The important thing about that is that it's not only about beneficiaries. Of course, beneficiaries are important, but it's also around having a safe environment where misdemeanors are not tolerated. It's beyond this wonderful acronym, PSEA, the prevention of sexual exploitation and abuse. It includes anti-bullying, it includes harassment, and it all is encompassed by the importance of having a healthy safeguarding culture. There is without doubt a correlation, not necessarily a causal link, but a correlation between where there's an unhealthy safeguarding environment and one where safeguarding incidents are more likely to occur or to be tolerated. I'm going to scoot through the next few slides. This is something you will be familiar with. It is a graphic which sets out the three dimensions of safeguarding, which are mitigation, in other words, preventing everything we can do to ensure that we reduce the risk of any safeguarding incidents happening. It's around reporting, the second dimension, which means that where there are incidents, and unfortunately there will be incidents, even in the best scenarios where we mitigate as much as possible, we must ensure that there are good, strong reporting systems and confidence to report. And the third area is around investigation. We must ensure that there are clear procedures set out to ensure that investigations are carried out. I'm going to move to the next slide now and just refer briefly to some of the areas which are important and how you can mitigate, and leave that for your reference, just highlighting that these are now should be survivor-centred and not looking so much at protecting the reputation of an organisation, but very much looking at the people who are being affected by safeguarding issues. Again, I'm not going to go into detail in the principles of safeguarding. I think they align very closely with what Tracy has talked about in terms of the principles of good governance, empowerment, prevention, proportionality, protection, partnership and accountability. And again, there's a lot of background information. I'm really presenting this at the moment so that we're sharing our understanding and setting the scene, as it were. Now, just to dwell for a moment on the role of trustees and how this relates to safeguarding. Now, again, this will chime with many of the points which Tracy has already mentioned around leadership and around collective responsibility. The first thing that we need to do, and this is guidelines and discussions which Oscar have put together, is being very clear about what we mean by safeguarding and what that means for our organisation, how that refers to us, because each organisation differs in its mission and in how it operates. The second area is the importance of having a safe and healthy culture, so that it's important that people know that getting safeguarding right is something which everyone commits to. The third bullet point is something which I think is really important just to dwell on for a moment. The role of a trustee and the trustee duty in safeguarding is not something new. It's the attention and the focus on safeguarding, particularly in light of the recent media attention and public scrutiny. That's what's new. This is actually all about acting in the interests of the charity. It's all about acting particularly with care and diligence around your charity. Connected with that, it's so important to remember that charity trustees have got collective responsibility, as Tracy said. It's good practice to nominate a safeguarding focal point or safeguarding trustee who has responsibility and lead on safeguarding, but that doesn't mean the rest of the board can say, whew, that's great, I don't need to worry about it. The responsibility, it lies across the board and collectively, although one person can take the lead for the practicalities of it. Oscar and SCVO have prepared a great deal of resources and top tips, and it's important to ensure that these are appropriate and fit for the purpose of your organisation when you use them. The final point here is really important. Despite all of our best efforts, despite the best of risk reduction and mitigation, things can and do still go wrong. Therefore, there is the notifiable events process and mechanism which Oscar has set up, which means that it's about demonstrating good governance. If you have an incident, the important thing is it's not what has happened so much as how you manage what has happened. It is about demonstrating that you're handling this event well. Tracy talked earlier on about, the importance of managing things like conflict of interest. It's very similar here. It's not about saying this is not happening or denying it. It's about saying, actually, this is happening and this is how we are dealing with it. Again, just a passing reference, another useful resource which is going to feature later on is that Bond have developed another a good governance guide for safeguarding with their key areas of priority, and we've got the links to that later on as well. I want to now focus very quickly on the culture of safeguarding, because this is where the focus of safeguarding is currently sitting. This is where it is particularly important for a board and for trustees to be very much aware that their role and behaviour and responsibility sets the tone within an organisation. That is why it's really important to ensure. That's why it's really important to ensure that there is a healthy safeguarding culture and that everyone on the board is committed to it. It's also important that we understand what we need to do to develop a healthy safeguarding culture, both as an individual and collectively as an organisation. I've put a few bullet points here about how we can recognise what organisational culture is, and again I'll lead you to read on those in your own time over a nice cup of coffee. I think it's interesting, again, the leadership. This is a very useful tool which we have been using in the trustee training. Bond, again, and Department for International Development have developed a tool on leadership and culture. That tool is in a draft form at the moment, but it sets out areas where an organisation can measure and assess its capacity and how it's doing in terms of leadership and culture, specifically relating to safeguarding. It looks at the accountability, and it has indicators on whether you're compliant, not compliant, or whether you've got a really good and healthy, effective safeguarding culture. And it deals again on the issues of accountability, on policies and processes, on programming, on systems approaches and systems responses, and ensuring they're survivor-centred, on awareness raising, and on recruitment and HR processes. Okay, so now we're going to move on very quickly just to look at what the Alliance has been developing to help organisations to really take a pulse check and measure how we're doing and what we have in place already in terms of our safeguarding paperwork and documentation. The importance, I must emphasise, is not around saying you must have your documents in place. The documents demonstrate and reflect that you have done a lot of work and a lot of thinking, that the board and the organisation take this extremely seriously, and these documents and policies articulate how that is done. These documents and policies are not something which are written, finished, and put on a shelf or a filing cabinet, and you breathe a sigh of relief and say, well, that's dealt with, let's forget about it now. So what's important is we need to look at what policies and procedures are already in place in an organisation. What training and awareness raising is already happening. For example, what induction is there to new trustees, to staff, what refresher trainings are there, what is relevant and appropriate for your organisation. And then alongside that, what risks are there and how do you carry that out? So what does this tool look like? This slide just gives you the suggestions about how to approach it, but I'll take you directly to the tool itself on the next slide. Now, my expertise in technology meant that I wasn't able to squish all of it onto the PowerPoint, but my colleagues have done a wonderful job in getting as much as I think the useful parts on it. This tool it operates in 3 parts, and I've put the main part on here, which is the safeguarding policies, the policies and the documentation which relates specifically to your safeguarding practice. You can see there that there are a number of different kinds of policies: the safeguarding policy itself, reporting and case management, whistleblowing, a code of conduct, right through to volunteer policy. This tool is important for you to work on together as a board, looking at what is in place. Is it needed? Is it relevant? Is it something which has to be developed? Is it something which is in place but needs to be reviewed? And that will take you to the next column, which is the action, and then who will do that and by when. So it's a really straightforward tool that you can use to assess what you have in place, but underneath that lies not just a tick list of what your documentation is, but actually what you as an organisation and as a board have been working together on to ensure that that documentation is in place and that it articulates where you are. The other 2 sections are around the broader policies that you have, such as trustee manual, employment handbook, and larger documents, and then specific ones for working in country, which are very much contextually based. So I'm going to pause now and hand back over to the chair and see if there are any questions.
Now, we've got 2 types of questions that could be put in specifically on Philippa's presentation, but also, please, questions more generally for both our 2 presenters, more widely on governance and good governance and achieving good governance. There is a question that was submitted in advance, which I'd like to read out and invite our 2 panelists to comment on. And I might come in and comment myself as well. But while we're doing that, could other people in this event please also think about questions that they'd like to put in and write them into the chat box? We have about 10 minutes left to complete our question session and to wind up. So I will kick off with the first one, but do please get thinking and write those questions in. The first question that we received is this one. I think it's a very good question, very relevant. For a very small charity, what are proportionate and appropriate steps to help us check and achieve good governance? Tracy, I think we'll ask you to see how you would respond to that one first.
Yeah, just very briefly, I think one of the key things is it's important to look at especially your risk management and your risk assessment, because I think that sets out exactly how your organisation operates and will also identify the areas of responsibility and where actions need to be identified and taken in advance. So I think that risk assessment is probably the critical area, especially for a small organisation, to really focus on, and to lean on us as well, where you're looking for support, and to look at where we can link with other organisations.
I unmuted. Yeah, thank you, Philippa. I might just add one quick one more generally, and this is really from my perspective, not only as the Alliance Chief Executive, but also in a private capacity as a trustee of a very small charity. And for the person who put in that question, I kind of feel the pain, I think. Sometimes just keeping up to date with best practice can feel a very, very heavy burden for trustees of a small charity. And I think the only point that I would make about that is to reiterate Tracy's. And it's to do with being aware of what good governance best practice actually means and working towards it. So for the questioner who put achieve, help us check and achieve good governance, I think it is a continuous process that the board trustees are always aware about what is needed in the route towards best practice. And it's really showing that that can happen, that's happening in your organisation, and then it is on your agenda and in your thinking as trustees is more important than hitting any milestones. More questions written in? Chat box. Not, I might take us on to talk briefly about some of the toolkits, some of those resources which are actually available to you, and some of the people that you can actually go to with help with governance challenges that you might actually be facing. The slide is up there for you to see, and for people rather than links, SCVO Information Office, not necessarily for the ones which are internationally specific questions, but as we've heard from Tracy's presentation today, a lot of these governance issues are relevant to all of us, whether we're working nationally or internationally. So SCVO, Tracy and the Information Office. For us at the Alliance, if it's safeguarding related, it's Philippa, our effectiveness toolkit is also relevant. Some of it is now out of date because it doesn't make any specific reference to safeguarding, but we have our safeguarding support package, which is up there, the top line of this slide. The effectiveness toolkit, which will be updated and digitalized at some point in the near future, is still quite helpful, we hope, for people who are looking more generally out with safeguarding on the steps that they can actually take by way of a health check. Before we close, I would just like to give my thanks again particularly to Tracy, joining us from SCVO. I have a feeling that we should be working more closely with SCVO, as so many of the issues which we all face are national as well as international, and there is a source of expertise there which we could be drawing on. So thank you, Tracy. Philippa, with your work going forward, I know that you can use the information from events such as this to tailor it ever more closely to people's wants and needs and what they can best learn from. So again, the last thank you is to our participants. Thank you for taking an hour out at a busy time for all of us, particularly those of us like me who are groaning under the weight of half-year reports to institutional donors. It was great you could come along, and hope to see you or hear from you or read your chat in chat box from more events such as this in the future. So very many thanks to everyone. I think we will now close. Until next time, it's goodbye from us.